artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hello, welcome to episode 242, continuing our exploration of AI in education. I am joined today by Nick Potkalitsky. He's the founder of Pragmatic AI Solutions and co-author of AI in Education, a roadmap for teacher-led transformation. With a doctorate in narrative and rhetorical studies, he leads AI curriculum integration at the Miami Valley School and develops pioneering AI literacy programs. His Substack, Educating AI, offers curriculum guidance and expert insights. We're going to talk about how AI has landed emotionally for teachers, whether there's a generational divide in the different reactions teachers have had to AI, how students are using AI tools and the homework problem, the changing landscape of policies in schools, how university requirements are evolving, and the teacher-led transformation of education that Nick foresees. Let's get right into the interview. Well, Nick Potkalitsky, it's a pleasure to welcome you to AI and You. We are continuing our ever deeper dive into AI in education lately, and I'm always fascinated by the journey that people have taken to get where they are today in this work. And so perhaps you could take a few minutes just to enlighten us how you have gotten here into the position you're currently in with respect to AI in education.
Yeah, I have worn many different hats in my career. I've started out actually as a classics teacher and studied Greek and Latin at Oberlin College, where I just had a wonderful mind-opening experience where my professors just really pushed me to think critically and humanistically about every subject I engaged with. After several years of working in secondary foreign language education, I got hooked by some deep reading in English language critical theory and started studying at night and found my way eventually into an English PhD program at Ohio State. And they have really one of the best narrative theory programs in really the world. And they have a center there called Project Narrative. And they introduced me into thinking about language in more of a structural kind of formulaic way and helped me really answer some of the deeper questions I had about how we make sense of the world through language. And did a dissertation focused on rhetorical analysis in 21st century American lit, and found my way back into secondary education post-PhD, and still working at a really amazing independent school in Southern Ohio, where I get a lot of space to bring my various educational inheritances to kind of bear on a really bright group of students. And then, in 2022, ChatGPT kind of landed. It was time to kind of go back to the foundations and think about how are we going to continue to do what we love and continue to help students foster and develop the essential critical skills that they're going to need for the 21st century workspace when there's these tools can so effortlessly do the work that we were asking them to do outside of class.
And how has AI landed in the educational space for you emotionally as an educator? What's your gut reaction to that, and how has that evolved over time as you've come to grips with this?
So my co-writer, Mike Kintz, we just put out a book called AI in Education, a roadmap for teacher-led transformation. He wrote a chapter on AI disruption as sort of triggering almost a grief cycle in many teachers. And I think it's a really apt metaphor because when I first was coming to grips with it and had a number of students taking these hard developed prompts at the end of, I was assigning like the long form essay at the end of a unit to evaluate knowledge gained, like a summative assessment. And then to have them kind of just offload that work into ChatGPT, some sadness, there's definitely some anger. And then there's sort of a sense of resignation, like, you just can't beat this. And for me, at the end of the school year of 2022, 23, I kind of had to do some real soul searching and started up my Substack called Educating AI, where we put out like a weekly newsletter, sometimes twice a week, if I'm so moved. I just put one out about AI grounding, and is language kind of a fundamental limit of AI scaling? So sometimes I'll get a post I'll see, I'll kind of like have to put something out really quick. So I started this like journey of weekly reflecting and started to amass kind of a network of other teachers who were sharing the journey with me. And I wrote up kind of a proposal for my school, and I kind of got into this like action mode and mindset. And there was one really important post that came out because at that time I was asked by my school to evaluate different AI detectors because we were going to fight AI with AI, was kind of the mindset at that point. And one of my fellow Substackers, Alberto Romero, wrote a pretty insider perspective on how these detectors work and how 95% of the time they work pretty well. But what do you do with that other percent when they're not working well? And it sort of stopped me in my tracks late July of 2023. And I was like, I can't build a curriculum around something that's going to have a false positive 1 out of 10 times. And so then I started to think more about like educational curricular reform as kind of the way forward. How can we restructure what we're doing in schools to meet the challenge of AI disruption? For me, that's just meant doing a lot more work in classroom spaces. If it's really important for me to do writing, then we're just going to do it in class. And if we're going to do writing outside of class, then I better well expect that there's going to be some AI augmentation kind of happening. And that's like a really bitter pill for people to kind of swallow, and it takes a lot of scaffolding to kind of get students into a place where they're doing that outside work effectively. They need resources. They need AI literacy training in their own right. But for me, that's kind of the 3 to 5 year plan where we need to be particularly taking secondary students. So that's kind of where I've gotten. I know I've gotten there much quicker because I'm really fully immersed in the work. And I'm kind of at this point really dedicating my career to, helping other teachers, one, sort of work through that hard work of the grief cycle, because it's real, that sense of fatigue coming out of the pandemic and then to be hit with another disruption of, it's only comparable in our working memory with the disruption of the internet,
And that's what I want to drill down into. So when you say this is a bitter pill to swallow, who finds it bitter and why?
Well, I mean, we have people who are rightfully concerned about the sort of the atrophy of critical thinking and writing skills and competencies in the face of tools that can do or at least simulate critical thinking, reading comprehension, and textual generation. So if you're assigning a student to do all of that work sort of outside of class and they need to bring that work back and demonstrate it either in written form or recorded form or in a slideshow, you now have tools that can like simulate all those processes. And if you have spent a career building a curriculum where your regular process is, I'm going to assign my students like slideshows where they're going to go out and read a section of text and then come back and report back to their peers. I've comprehended this, and here's the content, and here's the evidence, here's the proof. And now there are tools, and they're really only getting better. Like this new Google Learn suite that's kind of just come out with like Learn About and Notebook LM and Google Deep Research. I'm working on a post on it right now for another online magazine called AI Supremacy. And like when you use them in collaboration with one another, they're pretty incredible in terms of how far you can potentially get without actually reading the resources that are at the base of the entire process, you know?
Right.
So if you built your entire curriculum, your foundational premise is students like need to engage with the actual text in order to learn content. And now you have these like hornets buzzing around that are truly sort of standing in the way of, you know, these foundational engagements with materials. It's very frustrating. And there hasn't been much sort of regulation, and there hasn't been a lot of sort of like evaluation in terms of when tool makers are even like making educational promises about what the gains that students are having by using a particular tool. Like Google is really talking about like LM and Learn About as these like game-changing educational applications, but there's not a lot of like research to necessarily back up how impactful they actually are. So we're sort of like in this nebulous space, and the whole onus has kind of like fallen onto the teacher to do the redesign. So understandably, you're 20 years in and you have a whole curriculum set up and you're mid-career, and it's a considerable amount of work. One, just onboarding yourself to these tools, and then to think about, well, how am I going to rework my curriculum so that we can still engage students, still make sure that they're learning to read and learning to write, even while there are kind of these hornets buzzing around outside the classroom space. So the 5 stages of grief are a very natural place for people to be right now.
Has this created some kind of generational or other divide between teachers, where some of them are reacting in the way you just described, and some of them are more in your camp where they're like, okay, but this is exciting. It gives us some things that we can do that we couldn't do before.
Yeah, I haven't seen it necessarily be a division along like actually like generations in terms of age group demographics, because I'm currently working on a book project with a brilliant scholar named Terry Underwood from Sacramento State. And he's got 20 years on me, and I'm in my mid-40s. And he is in love with Claude as a writing assistant for students, and just sees in the next 10 years a tool like Claude just revolutionizing the way that we teach writing. And I know younger teachers than me who are just, no way, this is not going to happen. I'm just going to write my syllabus as, I'm not going to name names, but some younger, particularly higher ed faculty, there's like a group of higher ed faculty, they're sort of known as like the AI resistors. And it's becoming actually a pretty strong formation of teachers across, or instructors across the country, who are writing their syllabi like really tightly to like try to cordon off the insertion of AI tools into their classroom spaces. They're primarily humanities professors, and they just think that we have to sort of delay the integration of these tools as long as possible so that students have are working in unassisted spaces, even if they are artificial, because in the real world, AI is actually every application now that we use. So it's just popped up everywhere. And this is kind of like holding out against the flood so that our students, their brains have a chance to fully develop and reach their sort of maximum potential before we turn them loose to a workforce where those critical skills are going to be sort of radically shifted into more of like an AI-infused modality. So we're sort of dealing with competing pedagogical outlooks right now. Like one is that you can continue to teach critical skills and competencies regarding writing and reading within an AI-infused space. And I tend to lean more towards this camp because even when we're using AI tools, we are still reading and we are still writing. We're writing prompts, we're writing on top of AI's writing. And we're definitely seeing that there are different types of learners engage with AI tools in different ways. And for me, that's like really where we need to be doing research is how these different types of learners engage. Why are some learners very, very into the AI dialogue and continue writing and continue thinking through the AI prompt cycle, whereas others just kind of acquiesce within the first two prompt cycles and critical thinking seems to kind of flatten? That seems to be like a critical question for me. And then on the other hand, you have teachers who think that these tools are just an intrinsic threat and we need to maintain spaces totally without them. I mean, ultimately, we probably can do something hybrid.
Well, that's, I think, the critical question. When the large language models first invaded your space, they would have been with students probably doing their homework with them. Were the students transparent about that they were using those tools?
No, they certainly were not.
So that's the fundamental question here is those models are very good at doing the kind of things that homework has traditionally been. Take a test or write an essay or solve a problem. They're very, very good at that. Now, we've seen a lot of educators decide rightly that this is an opportunity to move into a space of more inquiry-based teaching using the AI as an assistive tool. But that means that you have to have a cooperative model with your students. If you have an adversarial model where they're just trying to get the grade and don't care whether they learn or not, then homework in that traditional way is a problem. And do you think that we can either solve the relationship between the teacher and the students to the point where they won't want to use AI to do things that it can do and pass it off as their own work? Or will we have to shift the work that they do by themselves into a space where AI use is not meaningful to their grade attainment?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to be really all of the above. You're asking the exact right questions. And this is what my research partner, Terry, and I are actively thinking about as we're creating a research environment for next semester. And we're going to be creating more of a collaborative space where AI tool use is allowed for most of the assignments. And particularly in order to meet the objectives of assignments, we're going to be writing like learning outcomes that involve particular kinds of AI use. So we're going to be kind of gradually using the assessment process to move towards specific kinds of use and kind of shaping the whole experience as one of trust. But this is just kind of a very small microcosm within an independent school, and this class is going to be an elective. Terry and I kind of talk about it a lot, but ultimately, we have sort of a meritocracy that kind of governs over our school systems, particularly in the states where I'm located, and students are competing in these high stakes battles to get into colleges, and GPA is a real driver, and they're looking for some sort of edge, and time is a precious resource. And if their teacher isn't sufficiently aware of how these tools can be used, if they find somewhat of an opening, then I think there's going to be a student out there that maybe is going to continue to take that opportunity to get ahead. So there's definitely structural and systemic processes at work that go beyond the individual teacher's will to create a collaborative space. So there's going to need to be sort of multimodal approaches in terms of long-term thinking about how are we doing overall assessment structures. I think that's like a big sort of like long-term question. Like personally, I think sort of the day of the high stakes semester concluding term paper are kind of coming to pass because it's like you're putting 45% of the grade in a single essay and you're not allowing the students to have any sort of scored engagements for the process along the way or reflection on the process. You're staging a situation where there's a real temptation to use these new tools for efficiency purposes or just to scale up the quality of an initial draft. And that's kind of where like redesigning the curriculum would be helpful, like using an AI editing tool in class. As you said, I really like the use of the term like inquiry-based process. I've increasingly over the past couple months have become more and more suspicious of text generation within classroom spaces. And I've just through my own experimentation, I've been really leaning into AI as like an in-class assistant, asking questions, thought partner. That sort of gets us into the whole issue then of like sourcing and authority and how much should students then trust the outputs of AI systems. But that's a whole nother level of critical thinking that we get to teach students. So, I mean, that's another win in my book. Sort of like how we got to teach them how to think critically about the internet 25 years ago. We get to teach them how to think critically about AI outputs. And that's really the work they need, particularly now that every search engine has like a AI topper that generates paragraphs on the thing that they're searching about from an amalgam of different sources that it pulls up. So doing like RAG retrieval. So this is just what we have to do in the language arts classroom. There's going to be people who are going to hold on to their Beowulf and Ivanhoe and whatnot. But I think part of our work is just meeting the challenges of the kinds of sources that technology is generating.
How do we make sure that we don't inadvertently abandon useful tools? And what I'm referring to there is that the homework products that can now be done by large language models are things that are useful for students to do. Just because ChatGPT can now write an essay about why Miss Havisham is so messed up in Great Expectations doesn't mean that it isn't useful for students to write essays about that or essays about what the causes of World War II were, as long as they are doing that using their own brains and not just copying and pasting what ChatGPT says. So for the same reason that it's still worth teaching arithmetic, even though we have calculators. So we don't want to eliminate things like that just because AI can do it. We need to make sure, though, that if students are doing it, that they're doing it and the AIs are not. And there are a range of approaches to that. One of them is more proctored work where they get to write a paper in the classroom. Of course, they don't have the benefit of being able to do online research during that, but it is at least exposing just their own brains and nothing else to the paper in front of them. How do you think this can best evolve?
Yeah, there's such a power to like essay kind of thinking. You sit down and you start writing, oftentimes because you have sort of a idea in sort of embryo state and you're sort of searching to put shape to it. And it's only by the end of maybe putting together a couple paragraphs that the idea kind of takes form. I know many times when I was an undergrad and just starting to get my writing practice together, that I would often write the first draft and I would arrive at my thesis statement in the final sentence of the first draft. And then I would have to go back and like reboot the whole essay in light of that insight that I wrote my way to. So writing as a way of thinking, there's thousands of years of evidence. So to like know that writing is a powerful technology to boost thought and creativity. So for us to just kind of toss it out because machines can do it in a very rudimentary and formulaic way, it would be very premature. So in my classroom, we do writing, like skills-based writing, and we do it in kind of smaller paragraphic form, or we'll do essays that are sort of spread out over the course, and we'll have kind of like a writing notebook that lives in the classroom, and we'll sort of develop it just in the time that we have in class. So I tend to teach in more of like a workshop mode, really like since the late 2010s. I've started to shift away from assigning a lot of homework. There's a whole like equity rationale for shifting away from assigning like tons and tons of homework. Homework needs to not necessarily be sort of new content, but to be looking at core concepts that were already sort of established in class and to giving students opportunities to double down on core competencies and skills. And it shouldn't be lasting for more than like a half hour per class. And I teach on a block schedule. And I think anything beyond that is just kind of getting a little bit out of control. So I've kind of allowed sort of the classroom space to be this generative time where we work on most writing in class. And my students are very much appreciative of that. And then at least I'm teaching seniors this year. And we're doing like a senior capstone, and they're asked to like really dig into a discipline of their own choice. And oftentimes they're engaging in like undergraduate level research. And that requires them to like really catch up on a lot of foundational theory that they haven't had the chance to do so. And this is where using tools like Learnabout and some of the Consensus and Semantic Scholar, some of the new AI research tools can kind of come in handy, or just your own average GPT, your own average AI model will allow them to skim across the surface of a discipline and get a sense of like what the larger research conversation is, in tandem with doing, traditional like annotated bibliography work, which in the past, prior to Gen AI, we would have students like skim the surface of a conversation by reading like 10 research sources on that topic. And then they would write like a research synthesis. And that was great. And that's hard cognitive work for a 12th grader to do. But this year now with Gen AI, after we do that work, then we have worked with AI tools through an inquiry process to ask about like gaps and holes and uncertainties that have been kind of left out of these research syntheses in light of this much broader data set that these AI tools kind of carry with them. Something like Google's Deep Research also can be a really great additional source finder. This is sort of the pattern that we're sort of seeing in postdocs and PhDs now in their own research processes.
You talk about a teacher-led transformation. And do you experience that different teachers within the same institution have conflicting policies on the use of AI, or have the schools gotten policies that all of the teachers follow?
It's very poliform right now across the U.S. I mean, you have places like Baltimore who just announced that they're going to the public schools in Baltimore are going to do a heavy lean into AI integration next year. It's very encouraging. So they're going to be purchasing an AI tool that's going to give all of their teachers access for instructional material development and allow students shared spaces where teachers can give students access to tools, and they're fully leaning into training and support. And I imagine in that setting, there's going to be some top-down organization in terms of policies. So having a tool sort of sets the pace for integration. If you don't really have a set tool in the school, then it's going to be more poliform from class to class. So like at my school, we allow some AI tools through our firewall, and my school administration is very much interested in AI integration. And we've written in some policy stuff into our student handbook. But in terms of how that's integrated into classroom processes, we have a lot of individual freedoms, and they're probably still about 80% of teachers in my school are not using AI tools in really any way. And the 20% of us are doing it in very different ways.
When you talk about a teacher-led transformation, what would that look like? Do they have the control that you would require of them to lead a transformation here? Or is that something that's more in the hands of the leaders or the principals or the districts? What does that transformation look like when teachers are doing it?
I mean, teachers, regardless of the firewall that's operative in your school, you can begin to educate your students about AI, just the complexity of these tools as a possible source of information. I know a lot of teachers who are kind of taking charge, even when they're sort of firewalled out, just by doing printouts or copy and pasting outputs of AI information and having their students just do critical reads of those materials, comparing and contrasting to maybe a peer-reviewed source or, something published just by a more popular magazine. So teachers find ways to get these lessons to their students. I think there's more of an imperative within humanities and social studies classrooms for teachers to do this work, particularly in middle school and high school. In the book that I wrote with my colleague Mike Kentz, we kind of walk through what we call kind of a humanities-based, soft skills-based approach to developing a classroom response that's not really tech-heavy, but it's more thinking about AI as an opportunity to think about critical reading skills, like what critical reading skills are our students going to need to develop to engage with these authorless texts, and what kind of writing skills do we want to make sure that we preserve and kind of create spaces within our classrooms to continue to cultivate and really kind of cherish these writing skills, so that whether our students in their careers are fully immersed in AI tools work or not, that they'll continue to be able to think through writing and make the impact that we hope and dream our students are going to make. And, teachers are, in these sort of transitional time periods are always 2 or 3 years out ahead of policy, of the purchase of big packages. And we kind of have a choice right now. Are we going to start to dip our toes in and try to figure this out a little bit? And I guess I try to dangle a little bit of a carrot, at least in my chapters of the book, that using AI as a tool for working on your own curriculum development is actually a pretty incredible thing. I've only found my curriculum to have grown much more sort of reflective and student-oriented. and sort of in the online courses that I've developed that really focus on using AI to differentiate instruction. I've really feel like as I've engaged with AI to enrich my curriculum, it offers students a good deal more options in terms of how to present their work, how to show evidence of comprehension, evidence of skills and understanding. And this is where there's sort of like an efficiency, creativity kind of feedback loop where because AI allows me to generate more versions of my lesson plans with greater rapidity, I'm able to then, as the human in the loop, constantly be pushing back on them. And through that kind of double loop learning process, I'm able to get to that next creative insight more quickly. And it's actually a fun process for me at this point. It's a little bit scary at first to be engaging with an inanimate object about something so precious as your teaching resources. But to dangle the carrot once again, it's just a tool out there. And, it's the only way that we teachers can kind of, I think, have some real power in this thing before all the big policies get written is by learning about it so that when hopefully admin kind of call us to the table, like we'll know enough that we can say, well, this is the way that this stuff kind of needs to go, that we won't just be on the receiving end of some policy that doesn't really make sense for us in the classroom. So teacher-led transformation means like a lot of different things for Mike Kentz and I. Teachers are really that powering engine, along with students behind this whole process of change that's happening right now.
And you're aiming students at the secondary level towards two possible futures immediately after graduation. One would be entering the workplace and the other would be entering post-secondary education. And of course, post-secondary education is grappling with these issues just as much or more. How are university entrance requirements and assessments for entrance evolving as a result of AI?
This is the $1 million question. You keep hitting them.
That's what we do.
Well, the big differentiators, GPA. So that's kind of the big marker. We have the college entrance exams. So like SAT, ACT. Those have, since the pandemic, schools have kind of shifted away from those. And probably about 80% of schools are now test optional. Your most elite universities are still holding on to those as an ace in the hole. Like if they have a stack full of students who all look exactly the same in terms of GPA, then they can differentiate in terms of as one possible variable. Somebody got a 5, they're counting them differently now, but somebody got like one little notch ahead of another student on the SAT. And then the third has been the college essay. And that has become pretty problematic terrain now that Gen AI is with us. Just because, the tools can generate pretty high level, particularly if you're a skilled prompter, a pretty high level piece of writing. And the 600-word college essay is very formulaic writing. So what this has kind of set up is these schools have to really look now, they're looking mostly at GPA and then letters of recommendation. Those are kind of standing out. I mean, I think some schools are thinking about doing more interviewing as part of the process, just because the college essay is no longer as trustworthy as a metric. I don't know. I don't envy people who are in that position right now. The essay used to be such an authentic space where you could really get a feel for a candidate. And we're not really getting like clear direction from colleges in terms of, do they want students to use AI? And then it becomes sort of like an evaluation of AI tool use. Like some schools, like Georgia Tech, for instance, they're adamant in their application, do not use AI. But most schools, there's not any explicit verbiage about to use or not use. And that just leaves students very confused. But I think most students are using it to do minor editing, but most students are actually pretty dissatisfied with the idea of using a tool to write a personal essay. At least that's where my students kind of came down this year.
Good. So clearly an evolving space to keep an eye on and try and influence. And I can imagine that some universities are going to end up interviewing more students using AIs to do the interviews. We have reached the end of our time here. And so, Nick, I'd like you to let the listeners know about the book. We'll have a link to that in the show notes, of course, and the courses that we've been talking about.
Yeah, so you can find Mike and my book on Amazon. It's called AI in Education, a Teacher-Led Transformation. And we have 6 sort of back and forth chapters. It's written like a dialogue, and you can use it to upskill your entire faculty. And we're happy to come out and do trainings to kind of supplement the curriculum. We've really thinking about it as an opportunity for teachers to have an impact on how things move forward with this important issue, just as we did when the internet came out, and how we gradually transformed that into a vital component of our instructional spaces. I think we have an opportunity to do that again with AI, and teachers are going to be at the heart of that process. In my consulting company, Pragmatic AI Solutions, we offer an online collaborative course that individuals can do, but also schools can sign up for multiple licenses. And it's focused on taking teachers from really no knowledge of AI, signing up for initial tools, getting inside an AI workflow, how to manage multiple windows, and working through some initial prompt cycles, learning AI, how to role play with an AI, and then how to use AI to differentiate instruction, just kind of learning that back and forth process, becoming a skilled evaluator of AI output. We're also interested in developing platforms that work for specific audiences. So just let us know.
All right.
Happy to work with schools.
Well, thank you for doing that work, Nick Potkalitsky, and thank you for coming on AI and You.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter. It's been a great pleasure.
That's the end of the interview. There's a link to Nick's book in the show notes and transcript. Nick's theme of teacher-led transformation very much dovetails with my own work, where I tie it to student-led innovation, because I see young people coming up with creative ways of using AI more readily than us older folks. In today's news, ripped from the headlines about AI, a small study found GPT-4 outdid human physicians when assessing medical case histories, even when those doctors were using a chatbot. The study, led by Dr. Adam Rodman, an expert in internal medicine at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, found that doctors who were given GPT-4 along with conventional resources did only slightly better than doctors who did not have access to a chatbot. But GPT-4 alone outperformed the doctors. Rodman said, "I was shocked." GPT-4 scored an average of 90% when diagnosing a medical condition from a case report and explaining its reasoning. Doctors randomly assigned to use the chatbot got an average score of 76%. Those randomly assigned not to use it had an average score of 74%. This painfully exposes doctors' overconfidence in their own diagnoses, even when confronted with evidence of better ones. Quote, "They didn't listen to AI when AI told them things they didn't agree with," Dr. Rodman said. The study was published in the journal JAMA Network Open. Next week, my guest will be anthropologist Beth Singler, returning to the show after our conversation on the New Year's panel a few weeks ago suggested there was much for us to discuss about her recent book on religion and AI. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You, and see more videos and articles at AIandYou.net. That's AIandYou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.